Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and oh boy, do we have a massive Easter egg for you that we missed in episode 6 of Ahsoka.
No way, we missed an Easter egg?
Yes, Doug, sometimes we miss Easter eggs, just like sometimes strong men also cry.
I guess I forgot that you never ever make a mistake!
On this temple on Peridea, we see Sith runes that have the name of an ancient dark side user. And this one Easter egg could tell us everything we need to know about the creation of the world between worlds, the origin of the very first Force wielders, and how this could all put the somehow in...
Somehow Palpatine returned.
A little later, I'm going to be joined by two of our very good friends, Bevan and Colton, who know a lot about Star Wars and are going to help us break this down. But first, guys, I got to thank everybody for watching the channel and supporting us. As many of you know, we have started our very own merch store at ScreenCrushMerch.com, link in the description. We actually design all of the shirts and merch in our merch store. We're really proud of it. We've got some really fun new ones like the Grand Admiral Returns polo and t-shirt, the High Ground shirt, the Hello There, the Say No to Death sticks, go home and rethink your life, and many others like Somehow Palpatine Returned, Doug as a Child, you name it. Shopping our merch store really is the best way for you to directly support our channel. This channel would not be here if it weren't for you. It's not my channel, it's your channel. So thank you so much for watching. So in our Easter egg video, we attempted to translate these runes on the side of this temple, but silly us, we didn't try reading them upside down. Tommy Wall on Twitter pointed out to us that if you turn these writings 180 degrees, there are clearly runes from an early Sith language called Ur-Katat. Right here, it clearly reads, Raise Kujet, ruler of all, may his reign, and then there's like an L and an A, but if you jump over to the other side here, we can see may his reign last for, and then there's an A and an L, and I think it could be the beginning of all time. So altogether, it says probably, Raise Kujet, ruler of all, may his reign last for all time.
Oh, okay. Well, what's a Kujet? Is that like a Swiffer picker-upper?
No. Kujet is a dark side user from an ancient race of aliens called the Zeffo.
Zeffo? You mean those aliens you wouldn't shut up about for the last 6 weeks?
Yes, the very same. After the first 2 episodes of the Ahsoka series, we theorized that these ancient people from another galaxy could be none other than the Zeffo. Now, when we were introduced to this star map in the Night Sister Temple, a map that led to this other galaxy, we did point out at the time that it looked a lot like the Zephonian technology that we saw before in the Fallen Order video game. And if you look here, we can see Zephonian runes that look exactly like these runes on the Peridea Temple, as well as the ancient Sith text around this ring. So, just to recap real quick, the Zeffo were an ancient race of Force beings that were strong with the Force, but they were neither Jedi nor Sith, a theme that is explored a lot in this series with characters like Ahsoka, Baylan, and Shin Hati not being Jedi nor Sith either. Now, the Zeffo civilization collapsed when they became seduced by the dark side of the Force. They were not able to maintain that balance between the two sides. Many Zeffo perished, and those who remained fled the galaxy to a place that they called the Great Unknown. We now know that this Great Unknown was this other galaxy where Peridea resides. Now, that ruler Kujet they talked about is a Zeffo who built a palace on planet Dathomir, the home planet of the Night Sisters, or so we thought. We now know that the dark side magic-wielding Night Sisters of Dathomir are actually originally from Peridea.
That is Peridea, the ancient homeworld of my ancestors, the Dathomiri.
Now, the Dark Lord Kujet was very powerful and was entrenched in the dark side of the Force, but he was not a Sith. It is important to keep in mind that just because one uses the Force, that does not therefore mean that they are a Jedi or a Sith. There are like many Force factions, such as the Night Sisters and the ancient Zeffo, who actually referred to the Force as Life Wind. And in the THRAWN novels, we hear about other cultures in the unknown regions that had different names for the Force as well. So, it's now been clearly established that the Night Sisters and the Zeffo are both very closely connected. They both are non-Sith dark side wielders, they both use very similar technologies, and they are both connected to planets Dathomir and Peridea. I also want to point out the helmets worn by these red armored bandits on Peridea look a lot like Zeffo heads, so perhaps this is the armor of old Zeffo followers, or at least their culture over the years still has a lasting influence. So the Zeffo are originally from the main Star Wars galaxy, and the Night Sisters are originally from the other galaxy. But during both groups' intergalactic travels, they met and shared technology, knowledge, power, and homeworlds. That is why we see Night Sisters on Dathomir, and now we have mentions of the Zeffo on Peridea.
But if neither of them are Sith, why are they using ancient Sith text on their temples?
Because this is where the fun begins. The Zeffo, the Night Sisters, and the Sith all have a big thing in common, a lust for immortality. Night Sisters are capable of resurrection and living on as ghosts via dark side magic, and we can assume that the Zeffo fled their own galaxy in search of surviving extinction and furthering their knowledge of the Force. The Sith are, of course, obsessed with immortality. Anakin fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader because he could not accept death. He wanted to become so powerful that he could even stop the people he loved from dying. The death of his mother and his desire to not see Padme die in childbirth is what ultimately led to his fall to the dark side.
I will do whatever you ask. Just help me save Padme's life.
While Palpatine was also obsessed with staying alive. Following his death in Return of the Jedi, Palpatine had to learn how to transfer his consciousness to another body. But despite years of research, even prior to his death, finding a body that could withstand his dark spirit proved very difficult. Clones of even his own body that we saw here in Rise of Skywalker deteriorated and rotted away quickly. And we also see these tanks of Snoke clones here on Exegol, so we can assume that the Emperor had to change out Snoke bodies pretty often as well. And there's also Darth Maul, a Sith who used his hate and lust for revenge to survive his halving on Naboo by Obi-Wan Kenobi. So Sith for generations have been obsessed with immortality, which is interesting considering that the dark side in nature represents things such as death. So what if the Sith occult and their commitment to the dark side of the Force was inspired by these early Force users' discovery of the dark side's immense power? And perhaps these runes, which are now known as Sith runes, were first used on Peridea prior to the formation of the Sith and were simply back then known as dark side runes. And as we'll talk about later, the very knowledge of Force wielding itself may have first been discovered by the Zeffo and the Night Sisters. Maybe the knowledge they shared with one another eventually gave rise to other Force factions, such as the Jedi and the Sith. Now, it's worth mentioning that George Lucas originally intended for episodes 7, 8, and 9 to tell us a lot about the Force and its origins. So Dave Filoni may finally be giving us a glimpse back in time to the beginning of the Force and how sentient beings began to wield the dark and light sides of this power. After all, Baylan did say that Peridea is the beginning.
What I seek is the beginning.
And that beginning is here.
If the old stories are true.
And with Baylan wanting to end the constant battles between the dark side and the light, it'd make sense that he wants to travel back to where it all started. Now, really quick, I want to talk about the world between worlds. This is the place that we saw in episode 5 of Ahsoka and in the Rebels series. It is a place that exists outside of time and space and has all these doorways to various places throughout the galaxy. Each portal has its own shape and symbols surrounding it, such as the Loth Wolf surrounding the portal to Lothal, and the triangle symbol synonymous with the Sith being on this portal to the Sith Temple on Malachor. Well, in Star Wars Rebels, we actually saw a portal that looks a lot like the Zeffo, as well as what we now recognize as Howlers, the wolf-like creatures we saw in this episode. Major props to MT from Heavy Spoilers for pointing out that really cool detail, and he actually did a video you guys should really check out. It goes into detail about all this stuff. He is fantastic. Paul at Heavy Spoilers, not so much. Anyways, this likely means that this portal in the world between worlds likely leads to this very temple on the planet of Peridea. Now, before I talk to Bevan and Colton, I want to talk about the Zeffo, the origins of the Force, hyperspace travel, and this world between worlds, and how it all connects to Baylan's ultimate goal. So, in the MCU, like the Loki series specifically, we've got the Sacred Timeline, an organized collection of timelines and universes created and controlled by He Who Remains. Well, I think it's pretty clear that the world between worlds was created and designed by somebody as well, and I think that somebody would be the Zeffo. And it could have been the Zeffo that established the portals that connect various Force user temples throughout both galaxies. We know that the Zeffo had temples on various planets such as Bogana, on Tatho, Dathomir, and Kashyyyk. So it could be that every temple that has a portal to the world between worlds was once a Zeffo temple, and the portals themselves were placed there by the Zeffo as they learned to use the Force for hyperspace travel. And these three Night Sisters we meet on Peridea are clearly meant to resemble the Fates and the Grey Sisters from Greek mythology. Now, they are essentially the personification of destiny, and what is Star Wars if not a story about fate and destiny?
You're fulfilling your destiny. Fulfill your destiny.
Now, the Fates specifically are connected to what's called the Thread of Fate. We even hear the Night Sisters mention the thread here when talking to THRAWN.
The thread of fate has spoken to us. The thread of destiny demands it, Grand Admiral.
So it is possible that the Night Sisters also played a hand in the creation of the world between worlds, and these threads that connect the different portals of space and time. The pathways in the world between worlds even kind of look like disparate threads. In Rebels, we did see Darth Sidious attempt to enter the world between worlds using dark side magic, as indicated by this blue flame. So this magic could have been used by the Zeffo and the Night Sisters to create the world between worlds. The Night Sisters also possess the ability to hyperspace travel. Here, in Jedi Fallen Order, we can see a Night Sister, Merrin, seemingly teleporting, but really, she's hyperspace tunneling, similar to what we see the Loth Wolves do on Lothal. Anyways, I think that the beginning Baylan seeks can not only be the beginning of the Force, but perhaps the beginning of time as well.
Days before time was counted.
And to access that beginning, he will need the Zeffo-created world between worlds.
I don't know, person. That theory sounds pretty whacked out.
So guys, that's our theory on the endgame and how all of this is going to connect to somehow Palpatine returned, but I am so thrilled to be joined here by two of my favorite Star Wars people. We have ScreenCrush's own Colton Ogburn, and of course Bevan, frequent guest and writer here on the show. Colton, what about you? Do you think this theory holds water, that the Zeffo and the Witches of Dathomir and the Sith, like they're all connected and it's all going to lead to Palpatine resurrection, or is this just like too complicated for Star Wars?
No, I think it holds a lot of water, and I want to give you credit and brag a little bit, because I know you won't. When we were doing coverage for the first two Ahsoka episodes, I had pitched you this idea about, oh, it's those ancient people from another galaxy. It's going to be the Yuzong Vong or something like that. Mm-hmm. And when we were talking, you go, well, you know, I think it might be the Zeffo. And I'm like, the what? And I had no idea what you were talking about. I hadn't played the games. And I was kind of thinking at the time, like, I don't know, that's kind of out there. And of course, you were right. And you made the case for it then. And every episode since then has, you know, with the Night Sisters and their connection to the Zeffo. And it's been leading to this moment. So when we saw that tweet that we talk about in the video, I just think it's so cool that we are getting to see, like, these ancient beings who had knowledge of the Force, and they didn't even call it the Force, they called it the Life Wind. And I love the idea of these beings discovering the true power of the Force and perhaps being like the first sentient beings that wielded it. And I'm glad that Star Wars is going that path. And, you know, the Zeffo, they're probably going to have a connection to not only the Night Sisters, but to the Sith, the Jedi, all of these other factions of Force users. And I really like seeing that Lucasfilm seems to, like, have a plan, and, like, different parts of Lucasfilm seem to be, like, actually communicating now, because, I mean, with the Acolyte, we're getting the origins of the Sith. With that movie talking about... I don't
know if that's true. I think the Acolyte takes place after.
Well, actually, I don't think that the Acolyte. I think that takes place.
No, I think it takes place after, but I'm saying I think they talk a lot about... We're going to get to see the up close and personal view of, like, how the Sith do things. Like, in that show, we're following a Sith apprentice. Yeah. So I think what they're doing there, and what they're doing with the origins of the Jedi Order movie that James Mangold is doing, I think they're laying the groundwork, and it seems like the story group or whoever is like running the canon now. It seems like they're actually talking to one another, and, like, with the incorporation of, like, these video game characters essentially with the Zeffo, it's just really cool, and it's really exciting that it seems like they have a plan, they have a path, and they're actually connecting all the different shows, movies, games, comics. It's really cool.
Bevan, what did you think about what we said? Like, what are your thoughts on that and where Ahsoka is so far?
I really enjoyed Baylan's scenes this episode, where he's talking about what he misses about the Jedi Order, what he wants to do something more than just letting another Imperial person just take over the galaxy. So he's dropping a lot of hints on his real intentions, and it seems like the Zeffo race could be where he's wanting to go. And I'm excited about the fact that we all don't really know the answers. And up until then, I felt like we all saw where this might have been going, and now we kind of don't know where it's going, and we're all kind of on an even playing field, which is what I love, especially if people haven't been watching Rebels or anything like that. We're all kind of on an even playing field now.
Bevan, up till now, we've been assuming that Baylan wanted, like, what he was after was the world between worlds, because he talks about power, and he's after the beginning, and things like that, which would be cool. there's mixed feelings on the World Between Worlds. Like, I've always been like, it kind of literalizes the Force too much. What do you think about the World Between Worlds? Like, how do you like your Star Wars super vague, or do you like having certain areas fleshed out like this?
I think it just depends. I think as long as the emotion is there and the character development is there, then I'm there for it. I don't need to have an encyclopedia breakdown of where they are at. If you notice, when Ahsoka was in the World Between Worlds, they never really stated that she was there. It was more about she's reunited with Anakin, and Anakin and her relationship needed to have a conversation, and she needed to learn something from her relationship with Anakin. And the relationship what was important, not where she was and what it stands for.
Did you like the way the World Between Worlds was portrayed in Rebels, like as far as the character development on there with Ezra?
I felt like sometimes the World Between Worlds was a bit like how they sometimes write The Force, where it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. The writers would bite themselves into like a corner.
That's not how the Force works. Yeah,
that's not how the Force works.
Exactly.
But they keep changing what the Force is. So
at least that episode did a good job of using the World Between Worlds for Ezra to learn a lesson about letting go of Kanan. You know, and I do hope that we're seeing the same kind of thing here. Like, we're introducing all these different aspects of the afterlife and these old witches and things like that. And ultimately, you're right. It does have to come down to the characters. And I talked in our talk back a couple of days ago about Ezra and how I thought his reveal was kind of lackluster. But it could be they're saving those Ezra moments for something really cool that's going to like have a greater meaning as far as like all this other stuff we're talking about. Bevan, just to circle back real quick to what you were saying about Balin, right? Because we were talking about, what's he after and how's this going to connect to these stories and folk tales. Do you think that we have seen the like of him before, this orange-wielding dark Jedi? Or is he actually, like you're always saying, like the first gray Jedi?
I mean, I really want him to be a great Jedi. I want it. I know some people don't want it, but I want it because I want to see more nuanced conversation about how somebody could wield both the dark and light side of the Force and not be a Sith or not be a Jedi. And it's clear that they're not going to do that with Ahsoka, even though I thought maybe they would do that with Ahsoka. I mean, Ahsoka just came back as Gandalf the White, as you said. So she's
but she is possessed with the spirit of the daughter from that Mortis arc on Clone Wars. And by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we don't have time to talk about it right now. But so you Google it. Sorry, guys. That's for the audience. I know all of you know that. Well, here's the problem that, I think in our last video, you like to bring up Grey Jedi. So in I think our last video, I was like, and Grey Jedi are stupid. I was kind of directing it toward you because I know you watch all the videos. But Lucas said they don't exist. The problem with Grey Jedi is, right, there are beings that can use both sides of the Force. The Bendu, the one in the middle, we've seen that. I always thought that like when regular sentient beings like human beings started to use the dark side, it just became addictive. And that's why Yoda had this like very 1980s just say no kind of policy of once you start down the dark path, it'll forever dominate your destiny. We've seen that's not true and that Yoda was wrong, but boy is it true most of the time. There are a lot of Jedi, like Ahsoka Tano, or not Ahsoka Tano, Asajj Ventress. There are people who have dabbled in the dark and come back, but for the most part, when you're in, baby, you're in. Like, that takes over. An interesting thing that we're seeing now is this idea that maybe Balin is that guy. Balin is this person who is thinking, I can juggle both sides. And if Balin does want to use the World Between Worlds, I think personally, if I'm going to just connect all these threads, I think the Zeffo originally tried to do this. Maybe even this Zeffo Dark Lord that's in this Sith text that we talked about earlier. If the Zeffo tried to do this, then that could have caused the destruction of their kingdom or the destruction of the Dathmiri kingdom. And that's how you can, because right now we have these two random ass things. Got the witches and Balin. How does it all connect? That could be how it connects. It could connect with Balin learning the same lesson that the Zeffo did.
Well, I just wanted to add on your point about, we've been talking about Balin seeking balance. That's what we've been talking about for the past few days. And to go off your point about perhaps him being the first great Jedi, and like we've seen different characters try to dabble, like we saw Dooku try to do it, he fell to the dark side. I think Qui-Gon kind of dabbled in that, but he kind of fell more to the light side, like he didn't let himself go to that middle. I think what we're seeing with the Zeffo and with what Balin said about wanting to go back to the beginning, the Zeffo are the beginning. Peridea is the beginning. I think the beginning of the Force, maybe. And we know that the Zeffo fell to the dark side, and that's what corrupted their society. So I think what Balin is trying to do is he's trying to perhaps go back, to where it all began and correct that problem. And I think he's going to realize that it can't be done, but I think that's his mission.
It's strange too, because a lot of people are just so psyched on this show. Like Dave Filoni's the guy, and the Twitter reactions are really positive. And you're getting that from this section of fans. And then there's other fans, like ScreenCrush's Matt Singer, did a great piece this week about how Star Wars stopped doing cross-cutting in these shows. And Matt, in general, has just been kind of cool to all this because he's never seen Rebels. And it's become very exclusionary. Ahsoka and Mandalorian Season 3. Book of Boba Fett wasn't exclusionary, it was just sloppy. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think it's okay if some live-action Star Wars can kind of exist on its own. It does make me worried for the Dave Filoni live-action movie, which is supposed to culminate these storylines. I mean, if you thought Avengers Endgame was hard to follow if you hadn't seen anything else, like, you're going to go into this movie and have to understand, if we're right, the Zeffo, and the World Between Worlds, and Ahsoka, and Sabine, and Ezra, and the Mandalorian, and Boba Fett. Why is Boba Fett a crime lord now? We don't really, like, there's all these, like, things that are going to be coming together, not to mention people going, where's Luke, Han, and Leia? So, and I know, Bevan, you've written a piece that we're pretty excited to show everybody about, like, where's Luke? I don't know how in the hell they're going to pull this together in a way that is simplistic enough for a single story, you know? Whereas the Avengers, I don't think you had to have seen any of these movies to have watched the first Avengers movie. Colton, please tell me how.
I think I know how they pull it off. You can get as complicated as you want. If you go back to the original trilogy, or just the first film, there's tons of stuff in that movie that we know nothing about. The Galactic Empire, all the spaceships, the different aliens, Tatooine, the Mos Eisley, the Jedi, the Clone Wars. Know nothing about when that movie comes out. But they had a simple story of this is about lineage, the dark side, that's bad, the light side, that's good. There are simplistic themes and like motifs that are in Star Wars DNA that if they stick to, I think, in Filoni's movie, everybody, even if you're not a Star Wars fan, understands dark side, light side, that kind of stuff. So if that is what the movie focuses on, and like we've been talking about with the balance between Balin and all that, I think it can work. And it's hard to say as somebody who knows all this stuff, but, you know, like all the details of Star Wars, but I think that somebody who is a casual fan can come in and enjoy that movie if they can look at it through a lens of, here's all this background stuff that, yeah, I don't understand, nor do I have to understand it to enjoy the movie. I think there's a way that they can make that work.
Well, like Bevan said earlier, it all comes down to character. New Hope worked because we opened with this like, oh my God, what's going on? We're getting thrown in the middle of the mix. But then the movie quickly rolls back, resets to a very familiar story structure. It's a fairy tale about an orphan boy discovering he's the chosen one, et cetera, et cetera. Bevan, what about you? Do you think this movie is going to have like that through character for us? Do we need that? How do you think this movie is going to simplify everything for us?
You know, they're going to have that through character. That's the only way that you're going to be able to get a normie or just a basic viewer to follow along, because to just kind of piggyback off of Colton for a second, the reason why Star Wars was so easy to digest is you had a relatable character going through something that no matter what gender or race you had, you could relate to. This guy wants a family. He wants a place to belong. He lost his dad in war. And he wants to follow in his father's footsteps and, you know, take revenge or right the wrongs of an organization that took away his family. And that's something that anybody can relate to. So if you find that focal point character for the Filoni film, and I honestly don't know who that's going to be at this point right now, then it doesn't matter if you don't know any of this lore stuff. You're going to want to root for that character, that focal point character, to succeed in their mission, whoever they are, because we're emotionally attached to that person, which is why it's so important that Star Wars doesn't forget character development and bring in more character-driven scenes so we can get attached to them and root for them to succeed.
And you know, that character might just end up being Din Djarin, because that is a character we kind of know who's been very attached from all this. So if you do need that person who has things explained to them, for example, he's pretty well has no idea what's going on. You know what I mean? And if the Mandalorians come in toward... Yeah, and Grogu as well. So, and then if the Mandalorians end up coming back from Mandalore toward the end of it, we're not really going to need to understand the nuances of Mandalorian politics. But like you said, you had that character who was relatable, who lost his family. And I've always said the most brilliant scene in Star Wars was this one, right? It was the scene where there's like this farm boy who's just dreaming of a better life. And there's no action. It's just an orchestra and a sunset, because every single teenager has looked over there and thought, gosh, I wish. And to me, that's like the essence of Star Wars. Well, guys, I have to wrap it up there. I want to thank both of you very much for being on. You should definitely follow both Bevan and Colton on all the socials. We've got their links on the screen right now below, and of course down in the description. But we want to know what you guys think. What did you think about this episode? Do you think that we're going to have like a big, complicated Dave Filoni movie, or are you hyped for that movie? Let us know in the comments or at any of us on our social media handles. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.